All right, let's get started. Happy Thursday, everybody. It's bright and sunny here in the Pacific Northwest where we happen to be. 70 degrees. It's a beautiful weather day, and this is the time of year where the Pacific Northwest really shines in terms of weather. My name is Scott Harvey. I'm the CTO of Atmosera. I've got with me today Rich Decker. He's one of our solution architects, and we're here to talk to you about optimization of your Azure costs and helping you unlock some savings and efficiency in your environments. There's quite a bit we've got to get through today. Lots of topics and avenues to explore. Hopefully you get something out of it that's applicable to your particular environment. So what we're going to be doing is first we're going to go through just a brief introduction. Why? Number two, we're going to try and understand Azure in terms of a billing and pricing model. We're going to identify some common cost drivers, things that increase cost or reduce cost in environments. We're going to start then talking about tactics for managing those costs, and then finally move on into best practices for right sizing. Things obviously can be different sizes, different SKUs within Azure, and we want to talk about how those decisions are made. In number 6 here, we're going to talk about automation, and then we're going to wrap up with some case studies. We want to demonstrate, explain to you how this actually has worked for us and our clients in the real world in Azure. And then finally, we'll wrap up with some questions and answers if you have some during the course of this presentation. So getting started here, what is the importance of cost optimization in Azure? Well, it's pretty obvious, right? Obviously, you don't really want to spend more than you have to when you're talking about the costs you have in Azure, but there are other optimization targets. There are other optimization goals. We're just going to deal with cost today, but think about it as a process you want to go through often with other things in mind. For example, competitive advantage. Competitive advantage, obviously, yes, if you're spending less on your environment, you can then perhaps sell it for less or increase your margins and have some competitive advantage there. But think about a technology advantage as well. So you could put API management in front of your API and not have to develop all of the insights and monitoring capabilities that are natively employed in that software package. And you will gain a competitive advantage just by applying a technology that already exists in Azure to something you already have. Other things, long-term sustainability. There are SKUs within Azure that come and they go. There are some that stay for longer and some that don't. Knowing what those are lends to your long-term sustainability. Also, in terms of architectural changes that you can make to ensure that you are able to better address your markets, better able to scale, better able to address some of these other things on this list, like compliance and resource allocation, are also important as well. These middle three obviously go to a lot of the cost, which is what we're going to talk about today. And then, we're going to touch a little bit on scalability, but really related to cost. But the ability to address your clientele, your market, your application in a scalable fashion is super important to how you are able to be competitive in the landscape. So when we talk about best practices and talk specifically about what's in Azure and how Microsoft views and approaches this, there are two frameworks that Microsoft uses when we're dealing with environments in the cloud. The first is the Cloud Adoption Framework. Now, the Cloud Adoption Framework is a Microsoft framework. AWS, GCP, others have this. There are generic frameworks available as well. But this framework really is about going from not hyperscaler cloud to hyperscaler cloud. So from on-prem, perhaps, maybe a data center you have in your office, and moving that workload, those applications, into Azure. This goes through these 7 steps here where you're talking about defining the strategy, planning, your readiness, your adoption, securing the environment finally, and then managing and governing it. And so there's 3 places in here that cost intersects. You have to define the strategy. Obviously, you're going to have budgetary constraints you've got to deal with when you're talking about making a move from on-prem to Azure. You're also going to have in your management and your governance of these environments a cost target to manage too. So 3 of these 7 areas actually align to cost optimization and cost strategy within Microsoft's framework as well. The thing on the bottom here, the well-architected framework, is more about you have an environment in Azure, you have an environment in the cloud, and you're talking about how you keep that well aligned to current standards. So these are the 5 pillars with a well-architected framework. There are lots of tools around this, just introducing these 2 concepts. And cost actually kind of stripes all the way through these things. It starts obviously with cost optimization, but then operational excellence, performance efficiency, reliability, and security all have some sort of cost invocation to them. So need to be considered in that equation as well. But these are really good guidance and frameworks for you. If you're not familiar with these, I would encourage you to look them up and become acquainted with them. They're great frameworks to lead into a cloud adoption. Now, if you're unfamiliar with how Microsoft deals with selling Azure, there are really 3 vehicles for that. These are the contracting vehicles that Microsoft has to enable you to consume things and SKUs within Azure. We'll start at the bottom right here, Microsoft's PayGo. Everybody is generally familiar with this. This is where you would swipe a credit card, you would get billed on your consumption per month, and that would just naturally come off and be debited from your credit card. The bottom left here is enterprise agreement. So in enterprise agreements, you're essentially in MCAs, so EAs and MCAs, you're essentially working with Microsoft or a seller of MCA EA paper and working with them to establish what your yearly budget is going to be. I can say, I think I'm going to consume $1 million worth of Azure this year. And for that commitment, Microsoft is generally willing to talk about pricing concessions for that level of commitment. But most times, folks are bullish on this idea of how much they're going to consume in a year, and then run into a situation where perhaps they get halfway through the year and they've only consumed 10% of their budget. So that becomes a little bit of a problem when you're talking about that overall commitment and then being able to true up and having to true up at the end of the year with Microsoft for EA. And then you've got the cloud solution provider at the top, which is what Atmosera is, and there are many of these around, but it's a different licensing model where essentially the cloud solution provider, CSP, will take over the billing relationship and allow you to consume things within Azure. You'll get one bill, and there's also bundled additional value with that in terms of the services that CSPs typically offer to their clients, the most notable of which would be support. So, moving on, I'm going to hand it over here to Rich, who again is one of our solution architects, and he's going to walk through some of the common cost drivers for how Azure environments work. Take it away, Rich.
When moving into the cloud, one of the biggest areas we always see a cost going out of proportion or skyrocketing is the notion of doing like for like between the on-premise infrastructure and the cloud infrastructure. So on-premise, your virtualization or hypervisor stack, it's a set size. You've purchased servers, they have a certain amount of CPU, a certain amount of RAM, a certain amount of disk. So that's a use it or lose it type of resource. If you don't use all the compute power, it's just wasted and costing you electricity to use. That hardware is a fixed cost. So you purchase the hardware once, and then you don't purchase it again for the life cycle. But then comes up the time for renewal, and then you have to purchase all new hardware again. Generally, that's going to lead to over-provisioning of virtual machines. We see time and time again that domain controllers get 4 or 8 CPUs and 16 or 32 gigs of RAM, when that is just not needed in any but the absolute largest of enterprises. When it comes to cloud, you're only going to purchase the services and the resources and capacity that you need. Because you can purchase those resources as needed, they are actually available on demand for the most part. You can just purchase, if you need a new CPU or a larger CPU virtual machine, you can resize your existing virtual machine. You can purchase a new one. You're basically renting the services. And for the most part, you don't own any of the hardware, so you don't have to worry about hardware refresh, life cycles, purchasing agreements, bargaining with a vendor to get discounts. That's all baked into the cloud service itself. So really, the over-provisioning, like for like, is what's going to drive up the cost because you have generally going to have idle resources. One of the other ways we see this in an active environment is licensing, incorrect usage, and misconfiguration. So if you are able to utilize Azure Hybrid Use Benefits, or AHUB, that's going to save you the cost of that rental license for the software. You save a lot of money if you use AHUB for the operating system, Windows Server, and especially with SQL Server. So if you have AHUB for SQL Server, it's going to save you a lot of money in the long run. We also see folks using SQL Enterprise a lot because that's what they did on-prem. If you're not using the SQL Enterprise feature set, you're wasting a lot of money in Azure. Also, this kind of comes back to the over-provisioning, where if you use the wrong SKU, you're going to end up spending a lot more money. For example, a domain controller that is very bursty in its nature, we can use a burstable VM such as the B2MS to support that versus a D-series VM, which is going to be about 20 to 30% more on the average cost. And also, the costs vary by region. So West US is going to be a different charge than West US 2, than West US 3. So if you have the ability to utilize different Azure regions, pick the one that's the cheapest. I also see quite often when Azure Storage is deployed, everyone uses hot tier. Well, hot tier costs a lot more than cool tier does. So if you can utilize cool tier, that's another way that we can drive down costs. Another big cost that has really kind of snuck up on us lately is folks utilizing the storage archive method to put files and information in a deep freeze or cold storage. Now, these are all these cold storage devices are generally going to be very, very slow and not able to be accessed readily. So Microsoft requires you to have that storage for 180 days before accessing it again. If you rehydrate that storage item before that 180-day minimum, they're going to charge you. They're going to charge you not only for the storage, they're going to charge you for rehydrating the file, and then you get charged for putting it back in. Poorly designed application data paths or high egress bandwidth is also pretty big here. And by a poorly designed application data path, that means that maybe I have a middleware server that is in East US, but I placed my web servers in East US 2 for some reason. Well, I'm getting charged for the data leaving East US and for the data leaving East US 2. Now, of course, ingress data into those is always free, but if you utilize a lot of data between regions, you could see your bill go up because of that. Another thing is disks being provisioned too large. The per gigabyte cost of a disk is the same whether I'm using a P10, a P15, or a P20. By utilizing a disk that's too large, I'm paying that per gigabyte charge for every one of those unused gigs of data. We need to make sure that the disks are provisioned correctly and to the size that we actually need. Generally, we're going to see an operating system deployed on a 128 gig disk, and then a data disk of being anywhere between 128 and 4 terabytes. Well, if I use a 4 terabyte disk and I'm only using 1 terabyte worth of data, I'm paying for a lot of space reserved that I don't need. Then, of course, there's always the unused resources. Someone has decided to spin up something to do some testing, and they forget to shut it down. Or they remove a VM, but don't remove the disks, don't remove the public IP, etc. And this last one's kind of sneaky. If you deploy some resources from the Azure Marketplace, if they're not published by Microsoft, there could be an associated per hour cost for that particular resource. So if you go into the Azure Marketplace and search for Windows Server 2019, you will see the Microsoft image, and then you'll see some images that have been customized by a whole bunch of other folks. Well, those images that are customized by other folks have a specific purpose, and they need to get paid for what they did. So they charge you per hour to use those on top of the compute cost and on top of the operating system cost. So Microsoft sends them whatever their per hour costs are for those. Now, we can use governance to help us out with some of the issues that we saw previously. And governance is not necessarily a thing, it is an idea. So we're going to look for orphaned resources. We can do this a number of ways. There are workbooks that we can deploy. There are PowerShell scripts that we can run on a regular basis. There are a number of different things out there that we can use to identify unattached resources or unused resources. We're also going to use we're going to group our resources by utilizing resource groups. That's going to allow us to define a specific set of resources and why those resources are there. And Azure policies are another tool of governance to allow us to enforce certain things in the Azure portal, such as requiring tags on all resources and deployment policies. There are other uses for policies, but these are the two that really drive towards the cost usage. On orphaned resources, these are the most common ones that we have seen as orphaned, with disks being the most expensive. Some of these, there is little charge or no charge to them, but they do clutter up the environment and make it hard to manage and maintain, which drives up your labor costs. To use resource groups as part of governance, we're going to utilize them to group items logically. Now, this is going to depend on how you've defined how the Azure environment's going to look when you go through the cloud adoption framework and decide what your plan is going to be. You can group them by application. So if you have a whole bunch of different application workloads, you can group all the resources that support that application in a single resource group. We can also group by resource type. All VMs go into one, all VNets go into another, all network type resources go into a different resource group. You can also group by department, by client, by function, and really anything you want. So Azure policies, the two things that really help with driving costs here is requiring tags on resources, such as who deployed this, why it was deployed, who's going to pay for it. Is it an internal resource? Is it a client-facing resource? Do we do chargebacks? Therefore, we need to send the bill back to another department in our company. Tags are going to allow us to see which resources belong to who. What level of service does this need? Is this a test application? Is it a development application? Is this production? So that's going to drive to your labor costs. Production application, of course, is going to require your operational team to actually go in and troubleshoot an issue if there's something that comes up. You can specifically tell the operations team by using a tag that this is a development or a test resource. Don't worry about it. Just contact the who deployed this if there's an issue. We can also use Azure policies to restrict or limit specific types of resources. We can restrict virtual machine SKU sizes. It's very tempting to go out there and deploy the large virtual machines that have dedicated GPUs so that we can play video games or do crypto mining or what have you. But we want to use a policy that denies that. So we don't use virtual machine SKUs that we don't want. Likewise, we can require or exclude things like standard SSDs or HDDs. There are 5 different types of storage in Azure now, hard drives being the slowest, ultra disks being the fastest. So we can actually say you have to use this or you cannot use this. And lastly, the limit deployment to a specific set of regions. This comes back to the regions all having different charges and the egress charges for data transfer. For example, we don't want somebody that is a US-based company who deploys all their resources in the US to suddenly deploy something in Central Europe or Australia East, because then we're going to be charged for the data that goes from those regions into our normal region. So to summarize, using governance, we're going to track usage by tags. It's going to allow us to identify resources no longer in use, prevent use of unauthorized regions or SKUs, facilitate chargeback to other departments, and lastly, identify the life cycle of a product or resource so that when it is no longer in need, we can then go through our change control process and remove that resource to discontinue the billing. So talk about how we can save a little bit. And these are just some of the ideas. There are more out there. We're going to look at our resource deployments. We have both a dynamic and a static type of resource deployment. With dynamic, variability in that resource usage is key. For example, if I have a Monday through Friday work week and I have an e-commerce platform that services folks that are in the business that buy things for business usage, maybe we want to horizontally auto scale that web app or that virtual machine to scale that resource out to handle load, and then off hours, bring that resource count back down. Azure Virtual Desktop schedules also fall into dynamics, and we'll actually talk about that in the case study. On the other side, static deployments, we deploy what we need because we have a highly structured usage pattern, and we expect 24/7/52 usage with little downtime, and we need expected response times. Rigid usage really is the key for the best bang of the buck here. Which is better? Neither. They both have their place, and they both are definitely something you need to think about when we're deploying and when we're operating the Azure environments. 2 cost savings programs that Microsoft offers, other than AHUB, Azure Hybrid Use Benefits, are reservations and the Azure Savings Plan. So reservations provide a discount on the compute cost of a virtual machine or some other resources. For example, you can do reservations on storage accounts to reserve disk space. They're available in 1- and 3-year commitments, but there's a limit to the type of resources that you can do reservations on. You can kind of think of it as a lease instead of a car rental. So we're going to lease this amount of compute, we're going to lease this amount of storage for 1 or 3 years instead of using it as we need it. Similar but not the same is an Azure Savings Plan. It also provides a discount on compute costs, also 1- and 3-year commitments, but this time it's not linked to a specific resource type. It's actually tied directly to compute usage. So it's going to provide us a discount on the raw compute usage. There are other methods available, but they do require participation in specific programs, like Scott mentioned, the EA agreement, and other things like that.
All right, thanks, Rich. So we've actually gone over quite a bit in terms of a lot of slideware and bullet items and talked about some things. And what we want to do now is get into the portal a little bit and show you how you discover where the rubber hits the road, all right? How you discover what is actually perhaps spending more money in your environment than you want, and how to remediate that, take care of it. So the first thing that we'll do is I'm going to pop over to the Azure portal here. We'll see how this all works. It is a demo and live, so it's always interesting to see if these things work. But You'll see here that I have my shortcuts, and this is me in my context of what we do here in our CSP. And my shortcuts here are mine, right? They're based on my usage patterns, my utilization. So you're not going to have the same view here, or you'll have your own view. But what you're going to want to do, at least what I want to show you today, is where you start from cost. So I'm going to type cost into the search blade here, and it's going to come back with a lot of different things. And there's two of note here that I want to point out. Number one is cost management, and number two is cost management and billing. You'll ask, hey, Scott, what's the difference? Cost management, and billing. Well, the difference is age. Cost management plus billing, the one on the right-hand side, is an older version, not outdated by any means, but an older version of the cost management experience. This one on the left is the newer variant of that cost management experience. And for the purposes of today, we're going to use this newer variant. So I'm going to click into that. This is going to load up, and we can see here that now I'm in the cost management blade. This is now showing me essentially where I start. So a couple of things of note here. First of all, we're in the blue sky testing. This is a subscription that we have in our CSP, something that we use for actually a large language model that we've deployed in our environment to do some testing. So it's used daily, and this is where I wanted to demonstrate what it is that we do. Down here in the middle, you see this configure subscription. I'm not going to get into that today. You're going to see these to the right of that, analyze costs in the blue button, and you're going to see view recommendations that right there along the middle. We are going to look at analyze costs today. So I'm going to click into the analyze costs button. This is going to bring up another context where I'm going to see how I can view this data, right? So a couple of things of note here. Let's talk about the views. I've got a daily cost view and a resources view. So, and I've got an accumulated cost, resources groups, and visualized costs. There's lots of different things that are available here. I would encourage you to go into your environment, the cost management blade, to look at them. But for the purposes of today, we're going to go into this daily costs. And now what this is going to bring up is going to bring up a stacked bar graph, right? And this stacked bar graph is, again, in the blue sky testing arena, so that's the subscription. What am I viewing? I'm viewing the daily costs, and what is my time frame? It's the last 30 days, right? That's what this is here. So what do I have? I've spent $417.74. I'm going to spend by the end of today $423.19, and this is what my expenditures have looked like over the past 30 days. You can see that there was a very small change here, right? So on September 1st, something changed. Generally, the first of the month is when price changes go into effect. So we can see that there is a likely price change that occurred in the language models and OpenAI funds here, right? So you're trying to correlate these step functions that you see in these graphs back to events that either you have control over or don't, right? But the visibility into them is the important thing here. We want to make sure that you're looking at this, at least on a daily basis, to kind of pick out these patterns of how these things work. There are other things you can do in here. Again, we're not going to get into them today, but you can set budgets. I think that Rich may talk a little bit about notifications and sending this out in automated fashion, but this is a really good place to start. So if you take nothing else away from today, please, the cost management blade is important from a starting position. So popping back over into our slide presentation, I'm going to move on to the next thing, which is Azure Advisor. Again, I'm going to pop in through the Azure portal. We'll start with the context you saw before. It's going to come into my menu. And for the purposes of this one, we're going to type in Advisor, or at least the first few letters of it. It's going to come in and going to try and contextualize to what I want to see. In this case, Advisor is exactly what I want to look at. And Advisor is going to, again, take us into the blue sky testing. This is my subscription, right? I'm going to say, I want just the active recommendations. I don't want to know what you recommended 6 months ago. I don't really care. And when I'm talking about it, these commitments, I'm going to break open this and talk about what this is, but the commitments are talking 3 years and 30 days, and we'll talk about what that means right now. So if I click into this commitments, it's now allowing me to talk about how long I want to commit to these things and model them. So I can actually click over into 1 year instead of 3 year and apply that. And it's going to change my recommendations down below. It's going to say, now I have this set of savings versus another set of savings. I can also look at my look back period. So I can look back 7 days, 30 days, or 60 days for Azure to perform its analysis. So in this case, I might say, I want to apply it over the past 60 days. Well, go, look at that. It changed the recommendations on the bottom because 60 days of usage has a different usage pattern than the past 30 days. So this is something to come in and look at and understand how your usage patterns actually persist across. Another thing I want to point out here is the advisor score. There's an overall advisor score that happens that you see for your environment, right? You can see currently this one is at 78%, which is okay because it's a demo and non-production environment. You can see over time though, we have had better usage advisor scores in here, and it's now dipped off. This is generally related to the security score that's over here, but there are some problems with this because you'll see the security score here represents 29% and security down here says nothing's wrong. Well, the reason it says that is there's on the back end where this comes from is Defender for cloud. So we don't have any Defender products turned on in this particular environment. Therefore, it can't get an accurate security score because we've got this locked down from the outside. So for security, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to look at that, but these other categories that we can look at are important, right? And cost being one of them. So I hope this has shown you a little bit about into the portal. You go into the portal, there's a lot of things to look at. There's a ton of stuff that you can sift through, but these are two things, Cost Management Blade as well as the advisor score, that would be good places to start. Going to hand it over to Rich now to do a little bit on deeper dive on the reservations.
Well, if you remember when Scott was just showing you, we had this message at the top. Consider virtual machine reserved instances to save on your on-demand costs. Well, that's all well and good. So if we take a look down here, we see that in this particular subscription, you can see that we're actually looking at a different subscription right now. We've got some recommendations to purchase virtual machine reserved instances. And then what is our potential yearly savings based on this discounted rate? Now, this is a pie in the sky best method or best case scenario. This is the 3-year reserved instance reserve savings. The 1 year will be less because Microsoft can then plan 1 year versus 3 years of their capacity in their data centers, which is what gives you the discount. So if we go into the Azure portal here, we are going to be in a different subscription, and we go back to that Cost Management Blade. I'm sorry, we go into the Advisor Blade. In this particular case, it didn't drop me back into my correct subscription, but we can still see the same problem here. We have a right size shutdown and underutilized virtual machines. Consider a virtual machine reserved instance to save on your on-demand cost. So we can click here, and now it has dropped me back into the blue sky. So this is where we can see that maybe I should get a D2 ASV5, and maybe I can save $558 a year based on a 3-year term. Well, if I don't want to see this again, I can click dismiss. If I want to look at it again later, I can hit postpone, and then the next time the advisor runs, it'll bring this back up to me. I can also click directly here, and it's going to bring up the ability for me to purchase this reservation right away. So it gives us a shortcut to be able to buy that. Now, I'm going to have to click here and go down to my subscription. And in this case, I'm not able to do that. The context that I'm in is not the correct context because I am a reader only at this moment. So I can't actually purchase it, but in your subscription, it'll give you the option to purchase it and then give you the option to scope it. So we're going to talk a little bit about ongoing monitoring about your cost analysis. Now, you saw this very colorful graph that Scott showed you. And this is in my Solutions Architect subscription as well. So we're going to come into the Azure portal here. And you can see my scope here is the Solutions Architects, and I've got a saved view of Webinar 2. We can take a look at the different days here. There's not very much variation in usage, but all of a sudden we've got a dip here, and all of a sudden we've got a major dip here. Well, you can see that right here, we don't have this light blue bar anymore. That's because the Microsoft Azure Domain Services was shut down. We no longer needed that for this particular use case. So it was shut down and allowed us to have a very big drop. Now, on the other hand, if somebody turns on something that is very expensive or has a large amount of change, we'll be able to see a big spike as well. Now, it is not the most optimal thing to have to come in here every day and look at this. So Microsoft anticipated that need and allowed us to create and save a view. So I can have this view that I like. I can save this view up here. I can share this view out. But what I want to show you is the subscribe feature. So this subscribe feature is going to allow me to have an email digest of this view. It's going to send me this view in an email. And also, if I click on here, it's going to give me the opportunity to send to multiple people and give me this CSV to download as well so that I can do some interesting things in Excel if I like. Now, this makes schedule private, makes it so that none of the other people that have access to billing contributor or owner can see what you've created here, and they cannot delete what you've created here. So this allows you to make it private to just you and keep the information being sent to just you. Now, there's a start date and an end date, and we've got a frequency. I can do every day, Monday through Friday, just the weekdays. You notice here, weekday is Sunday through Thursday. We have every Thursday, only because I'm logged into this on Thursday. If I was logged into it on Monday, it would say every Monday. So it's contextualized there. And then we have every month after the invoice is finished. So that particular selection there is they will not send you the email at midnight on the 1st of for the previous month. What will happen is Microsoft has to actually compute the final bit of charges for that last day of the month. Once that has been computed and input into the billing system and ready to be invoiced, then Microsoft will send you that final bill or the final cost analysis. And then we have custom. So just like when you're scheduling a recurring meeting in Outlook, I can do the same here. Maybe I don't want to see it on Thursdays for some reason, but I want to see it weekly. Maybe I want to be able to select daily, and maybe I want to do it every month. This is just different options you have to get this same report emailed to you every day. So you don't have to take the time to log into the portal, navigate here, and then interact. Now, when you get the email, it is non-interactive. So I can't highlight like I'm doing here, but you'll be able to see a large variation in charges, like right here. If this wasn't my Sandbox subscription, I would be very concerned to see my daily usage drop down from $27 a day to $9 a day. That would concern me quite a bit, and that would then allow me to log into the portal and start investigating. So I'd like to talk a little bit about a few best practices we have for saving your money. I like to do automated startup and shutdown. It is applicable to most virtual machines. Now, there are some virtual machines that you can't do a shutdown on because they're important to your environment, such as domain controllers. If you're still running an Exchange server, and you can't do that, or if you're running any kind of external facing platforms for your clients, then you can't shut those down either. There is built-in automation for all virtual machines to shut down on a specific time. In all of our test dev subscriptions, every time we deploy a virtual machine, for Atmosera, it's required to utilize this. That way, at the end of the workday, if I forget to shut down my test bed, it'll shut it down for me. This is not something that's automatically set up. You have to set it up when you're creating the VMs themselves. There is also automated startup for VMs, also known as Start on Connect. And then you can also develop a custom script for startup and shutdown of systems as you want. Now, there are other options available for specific resource types and specific environments. They're very nuanced. I'm not going to get into them in a discussion like this. But suffice to say, there's always options to help you out with automated startup and shutdown. I'm also going to suggest you use resource scaling. Horizontal scaling is mostly automatic. It applies to things like the virtual machine scale set, app gateways, and app service plans. What this means is my app gateway, I can have one instance of that application gateway running unless I start seeing a lot of load. When I start seeing a lot of load, I trip a usage percentage, and then Azure will automatically start up another application gateway. When that load then drops down below a certain threshold, it will then shut down that additional application gateway. That way I'm not paying for 2 app gateways all month. I'm just paying for 1 all month plus the burst usage. App service plans very similar, and so are virtual machine scale sets. Now, on the vertical side, that's mostly manual. That means you're going to change the SKU of a system. It really applies to app service plans and virtual machines the most, such as on a virtual machine, if I'm running a D4 SKU, which is for 4 CPUs, and I all of a sudden need that machine to start taking the load, I need 8 CPUs, I shut the machine down, scale it up to 8, turn it back on. Vertical scale up also works on disks, the app service plans, etc. When we're talking about resource scheduling, Azure Virtual Desktop has its own resource scheduling. This is the biggest feature for Virtual Desktop in the cost realm. Now, the security aspects and the ease of use aspects are definitely bonuses, but the Azure Virtual Desktop allow me to create work schedules. I can create up to 7 different schedules, but Atmosera really only recommends 2, one for the work week, one for the weekend. When I'm setting up these schedules, they give me an option for depth or breadth first. What that means is if I have a pool of 3 virtual machines to handle the load, If I select depth first, Azure Virtual Desktop's backend will fill that machine up to the point that I have specified. And then once it hits that point, it'll turn on the next virtual machine. So I don't have virtual machines running when I don't need them. Now, we're talking about breadth first. User 1 will log into system 1. Atmosphere will then see that, Azure will see that and turn on virtual machine number 2. Then user 2 will log into that virtual machine number 2. So it allows us to have a more performant environment. The schedule allows me to set ramp up, workday, ramp down, and after hours settings per schedule. So I like to generally set this as a ramp up at 7 a.m., workday between 8 and 6 p.m. Ramp down is 8 p.m. till 10 p.m. And then after hours, again, from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. So what that allows me to do is set that depth, breadth, and triggers for different settings in these 4 different sections. I talked a little bit about auto scaling based on a trigger. So what that means is, again, if I hit a certain CPU utilization, if I hit a certain number of requests per something, it will then see that and use that as a scale out trigger to instantiate another VM or another app service plan or what have you. App gateway. Scaling out adds more of the same size to handle the load. So if I have an app service plan that is a 4 CPU plan, it will then add another 4 CPU plan. Autoscaling does utilize a load balancer to do this, but that's behind the scenes. You don't ever see this. And then lastly, I want to talk a little bit about reservation scope. So reservations can be scoped in 3 different places. We can scope it to a resource group, a subscription, or the entire thing. So there are use cases for each one, but setting it at the top allows me to maximize the utilization of that particular reservation. So if I have a reservation for a D4 virtual machine and I shut that machine down 3/4 of the way to the month, say 600 hours. Well, I'm wasting the other 130 hours of time on that virtual machine that I still paid for because it's not a consumption-based model when I do a reservation. Well, if I have another D4 somewhere else in another resource group, I can then take that extra 130 hours and apply that to that D4. Now, sometimes you may not want to do this, such as maybe you segregate internal departments by subscription. Well, you don't want HR to benefit from IT's purchase, so you set it at the subscription level. And maybe in the resource group, you separate out clients. So maybe you have an application that stamps out a new set of resources for each client. Well, if client in the left resource group there purchases a reserved instance because they have a 3-year contract with you, and the one on the right has a 1-year contract, I don't want them to be able to benefit off of each other, and so that I would assign it down there at the lowest level. We're going to get in a couple of real world case studies here now about cost savings. This first one, unfortunately, I can't share the name of the client because we just can't share the name of the client. But this is a migration to Azure Virtual Desktop with scheduling. So the client themselves, they're a financial services client and serves small, medium business. They have a host of different things they do. They have a virtual desktop solution, but it's based on older technology. It's running 24/7 by 52. And there's very little use after hours. Their VDI solution also had significant licensing costs and was plagued by outages. So the solution was to migrate the client to Azure Virtual Desktop. Azure Virtual Desktop allowed me to reduce the licensing costs, configure those work schedules for start and stop automation so that we weren't burning time that we didn't need to burn and getting charged for it. And then it also allowed me to save their operational costs by reducing the number of outages that was caused by that old technology. One of the administrators there told me that he had spent on average 4 to 5 hours a week dealing with just the VDI problems. Well, now that administrator can take that 4 to 5 hours per week and do something more productive with it. The outcome there is unfortunately a copy and paste from the wrong slide. But the outcome for this particular client was they were able to reduce the operating costs of this virtual desktop environment by about 2/3. It allowed them to save that 4 to 5 hours per week for that troubleshooting, and allowed them to cut out something like $12,000 a year in licensing costs. So as you can see, these different cost savings methods can actually add up quite a bit.
Thanks, Rich. I've got one more case study to go over with y'all, and I know we're kind of approaching the last 5 minutes, and I do see we have a couple of questions, so I'm going to zip through this and then get to hopefully those. So the other client that we have to talk about with you today is Millen. Millen is, they're in the healthcare industry, and they're an ISV, right? So they're a SaaS offering. They provide a SaaS service to their clients. And they came to us for some help in figuring out how they were going to be able to leverage that. They've got a pretty common way of going to market with a SaaS platform, but I wouldn't say that the most technically forward way, and that is they deploy and address clients via an infrastructure stamp, meaning that there's a web app and a database that goes along with every one of their clients, which is fantastic because it really isolates resources and allows deployment to happen quickly. But because it isolates resources, it can add cost to the equation too, since there are lots and lots of web apps that are being run, lots and lots of databases that are being run. So one solution to that is it's a similar concept to where elastic pools are with databases. If you're familiar with that in the SQL world, Azure SQL world, is to use app service plans to group their web apps or app services into areas so they can have groups of clients and share those resources. They've got clients across the US, each operating different loads, different time zones, different usage patterns, etc. Grouping disparate or unlike things together to take advantage of those disparate usage patterns is how we helped Millen succeed in driving costs down in this environment. So yet another example of using these tools that we've provided to you today to analyze and go look at how you might drive costs out of these things. So finally, Apicera is a CSP, right? We do provide managed and professional and training services to companies that are looking to improve their operating posture within Azure. And one offer that we have in the marketplace right now is the Secure Azure Jumpstart. As you can see here, it's really a migration of a certain number of VMs or workloads into Azure, and helping you optimize that and going through some of the exercises that we've discussed today. If you would like to learn more about that QR code there can be scanned. We'll take you to a website, and you can put your information in and certainly get more information on that. Additionally, this slide deck will be available if you wanted to click through that as well. It will be uploaded, and you'll be able to download the recorded version of it as soon as we get it uploaded here. But I did see we had a few questions, and I did want to get to those before we run out of time here. So this is, you mentioned storage tiers. Does that work for backups too? Rich, does that work for backups too?
Yeah, Microsoft actually recently released the ability to use tiered storage with backups. Now, I'm not sure if that's out of preview or not yet, but yes, there will be tiered storage available for backups as well.
Awesome. We've got another one here. Why are prices different between regions?
Well, so if you think about an Azure region, well, let's take West US for example. That thing's been around forever. It's paid for. West US 3 is brand new. It's down in Phoenix, and it's populated with a whole bunch of new systems, from storage to network to air conditioning. Being in Phoenix, it needs a lot of air conditioning. So they have to recoup their investment, and they have a certain amount of time that they want to recoup their investment in. So naturally, things are going to cost more there. Also, the technology in that new data center is newer. So it's going to have the latest servers in there with the latest processors from AMD and Intel versus some of the older processors in the older data centers. So that's generally why you're going to see a discrepancy in price between regions.
Awesome. Last question. I know we're at time, but I think this one will be quick. Can you get notified when you spend too much?
Yes. I didn't get into it, but there is a way to set budgets in Azure Advisor. I'll be happy to walk through that with individuals if they'd like. That allows you to set a budget, and when you exceed that budget, it will then send an alert, email, or what have you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. I want to wrap this up. Again, please click on the QR code or take a picture of that. Go to the website. Request more information if you'd like. We'd love to hear from you. It's been fantastic talking to you today about cost optimization and being able to drive efficiency into your Azure environments. Rich and I have had a good time putting this on for you and hope to hear from you. Please have a great day, and thanks for your participation.